Thank you for all the words, and thank you everybody for all the work that you've done up until this moment to create space. Good morning, good afternoon, good night, wherever you are in the world. I'm privileged and thankful that you are here, taking a little bit of your time that is so precious to listen to this wonderful panel. So as it was pointed out right before we started, this is the final panel of three-part series, dialogues where frontline and local leaders have been discussing issues like the rise of mandatory detention, what the current situation is, and today we will try to envision how a world without mandatory detention would work for everybody's benefit. This is an opportunity to have an open discussion towards a community-led vision for 2045, if you can even imagine that. And it's important that we put people, care, and social justice at the center. Can you picture that? Can you even imagine? In my experience, peace promoters do not prove themselves in happy times. Rather, they are able to do this in the most difficult moments. It is in those critical moments that we can dream change. So today, we will hear some of those dreamers. And dear audience, I hope you are ready for this. So to start this conversation, let me introduce you to our panelists. First, we will hear from Cathy Alvarez. She is an attorney with the StreeLawPh, an organization of lawyers and advocates working for access to justice and protection and promotion of human rights for all, especially for those who use drugs in the Philippines. Then we will hear from Alexi Zagreb, and I'm so sorry, this is a very hard name to name in my language. My original language is Spanish. So Oleksiy Zagreblie, founder of Free Zone at Ukraine-based association of formerly detained people that work to ensure people who are incarcerated get timely access to high-quality medical care. Then we will hear from Jonathan Osei, founder and executive director of the POS Foundation, a human rights and youth development focused civil society organization that advocates for access to justice and respect for human rights in Ghana. And last but not least, of course, we will hear from Andrea James, who is a co-founder and director of the National Council for Incarcerated and Formerly Incarcerated Women and Girls, which work to end incarceration of women and girls in the United States and to shift from criminal legal system focused on punishment to one based on justice. Let me remind each panelist that you have 7 to 10 minutes to present. We will then follow up with a 15-minute moderated discussion. Then, dear audience, we will have 30 minutes of Q&A session, and there is a chat available for you to write all your burning questions, and personnel of the OSF will help us to sort out some of the questions that we have. Remember, we are translating into multiple languages, so keep that in mind when you're speaking so that we are able to, let's not burn out our translators who are going to do such a wonderful work. With no further ado, I will start with Cathy Alvarez from the Philippines. Please go ahead.
Thank you, Rosa. Good day, everyone, and for all of you joining us from the Philippines, good late evening. It's past 10 p.m. here. My name is Cathy Alvarez, and I'm the Executive Director of StreeLawPh. It's a small organization of lawyers from the Philippines. These past few weeks, I must admit, I agonized about whether I was in the best position to speak about the future, especially a future without mandatory detention. After all, the Philippines is infamous for the conditions of our detention facilities, for egregious violations of human rights and due process that have led to the detention and death of thousands of Filipinos accused of being involved in drugs and other so-called crimes. And now, thousands have also been arrested or detained for COVID-19 related quarantine violations. But I realized that those of us working on human rights in the Philippines and in other countries that are similarly situated, we are faced with the horrendous consequences of criminalization and over incarceration every day. Who else then would be best suited to reimagine a world where things do not have to be the way they are now? We are the ones who need to hold on to this hope the most so we can continue to work tirelessly for a different, more compassionate future. But first, please let me allow me to share something from the not so distant past. In 2017, when the body count of the war on drugs in the Philippines was skyrocketing, my colleagues and I attended a human rights conference for lawyers. The objective was to gather human rights lawyers who can help support the families of the victims of drug war killings. However, in the smaller group discussions, many of those who attended would say they would only help if it was a case of mistaken identity or if the victim was not really involved with drugs. You will hear this sentiment echoed in other gatherings where legal assistance to help with the victims of extrajudicial killings were discussed. Help was available only for those who were not really involved with drugs. It was as if people who use drugs already forfeited their right to counsel by virtue of their drug use. In fact, many institutions and organizations require drug testing first before allowing access to services, including access to healthcare and much needed livelihood assistance. Which leads me to ask, what makes this so different from law enforcement arresting people who use drugs and then planting evidence? And if I may be so bold, what makes this so different from the mass killers in motorcycles shooting people for using drugs? All of these, while in varying degrees of violence, all come from the same place of stigma and dehumanization that is a consequence of criminalizing people who use drugs in the Philippines and other parts of the world. Criminalization has not only destroyed thousands of lives in my country, it has also destroyed institutions. The criminalization of drug use and of people who use drugs facilitate corruption in the justice system. The mandatory listing of suspected drug personalities in villages have turned communities against each other. So how do we reimagine a future amid all of these? I take comfort from the fact that we cannot work for a better future without first acknowledging the past and what is still happening in the present, and then learning from them. We formed StreeLawPh because we wanted to provide legal services and access to justice for people who use drugs while working for humane drug policies in the Philippines. To say that this is challenging is an understatement. One of our crucial realizations while doing this work is that the only way forward to genuinely humane drug policies is to decriminalize. The only way for people who use drugs in the Philippines to be able to actively participate in crafting policies affecting their lives is to decriminalize. The only way for law enforcement and the criminal justice system to no longer have power over the lives of people who use drugs is to decriminalize. The only way to end mandatory detention, whether in jails and prisons or coercive rehabilitation facilities, is to decriminalize. We need to stop sending people to prison for drug use and possession. Yes, this sounds like a very long way from where the Philippines is right now, but it clearly is not impossible. First, we need to learn from those who are already practicing it. And so we ask you, please help us. Allow us to learn from your mistakes. Allow us to listen to your victories, and let us share in your hopes. This interactive map from Talking Drugs, which we have shared right now, shows us how decriminalization is already being done in several countries. I find this resource to be both very informative and aspirational. My dream is to live to see the Philippines be among these countries. I've also read some of the questions from the past 2 days coming from my country, asking how human rights organizations can include people who use drugs in their discussions. My answer is this. Please provide spaces where communities of people who use drugs feel safe and respected. This includes the need to stop requiring people to submit to a drug test before they can access services. Stop requiring people to be drug free before they can participate in programs and activities. This also includes not oversimplifying drug use as a disease that needs to be cured. Otherwise, we are only going to replace one form of detention for another, with mandatory coercive rehabilitation programs replacing jails. Drugs and drug use are complex issues. And one important lesson I've learned in the few years we've been working as StreeLawPh is that while the lawyers and advocates may know the laws and all of the conventions, but it is the people who use drugs who are the real experts of their own lives. And we need to work towards policies that will reflect and respect this. We need to rebuild our institutions and restore trust in our communities. Decriminalization is an important step towards this more humane, more compassionate future. Let me end by congratulating the people of Oregon in the United States on voting for decriminalization. We look forward with so much hope to learn from your experience. Who knows, maybe yesterday it was Oregon. Perhaps in the next few months it could be Vancouver. And I hope not too long from now, it could be the Philippines. Thank you.